South Africa's energy challenges are expected to feature prominently in this year's State of the Nation address. In fact, you might remember back in 2019, President Ramaphosa announced an ambitious plan to unbundle Eskom. In fact, since then, a series of reforms have paved the way for private players in some instances to enter the energy market. A presidential task team has begun work to mobilize funding for a just transition from South Africa's heavy reliance on coal. Let's distill all of this for you now. Bring in Brian Kamanzi from the Institute for Economic Justice, who says, in fact, case studies exist in Europe that should serve as warnings that those who plan to go ahead with this perhaps should be, look out for unintended consequences. That's my paraphrasing of it. Brian, it's great to see you. Thanks very much indeed for making time. And full disclosure, we're speaking to you on the back of a piece that you put together for New Frame, which I think was very interesting, where you do speak about the unintended consequences of us going down the unbundling route for Eskom, given the challenges that exist in the global north.
Absolutely, and thanks for having me. So I think what's important for some background context is that this concept of unbundling state utilities into separate entities is part of a set of market reforms that come from and have been propagated since the 1970s from institutions like the World Bank, the IMF, Bretton Woods institutions, many of which are enthusiastic about financing a just transition along an unbundled path for Eskom. And so I thought it was very important for us to be really considering what's happening with the electricity price in Europe as it's skyrocketing. It's important for us to think about what this means for our transition. Yeah. Because in truth, Eskom has stated that the future for the South African energy system is solar, wind, and gas. And there's some interdependencies. The sun doesn't shine all the time and the wind doesn't blow all the time, so you often need to use gas. And as gas prices have been spiking globally, in South Africa we don't have gas. Communities have been pushing back against gas exploration in South Africa, so we can expect to be reliant on imports. So we will be exposed to price volatility, which is already compounding issues of unaffordability today.
Yeah. What is also interesting is how you touch on, opening up the energy market and how that too may have unintended consequences when you consider typically what private players prioritize. In other words, it's sometimes really just about profits over people, and that too may have an adverse effect when you think about what the price of energy may cost in the event that we end up relying on private players.
Precisely. So to put it simply, there are two types of ways in which energy is procured. On a day-ahead basis, so the day before Eskom purchases a certain amount of coal, contracts from various generators, diesel generators and pump storage generators, assesses how much is available, matches that with the demand they expect, and then the next day they contract that and execute it. Wind and solar, of course, it's available whenever it's available. You can't make more sun and more wind, and so you immediately integrate those into the grid. Now, that's in a fully public system, in a public and a private system today. In a more privatized system, what you have is that private generators of different types, whether they be gas or diesel, are able to bid for prices the day before, which essentially creates a profit motive. So they're able to hike up prices the day before based on changes in the gas price internationally. So what we might expect in future with an unbundled electricity sector is being exposed to price volatility within a week basis, potentially a month basis, which could leave vulnerable households in South Africa very exposed.
That said, though, what do you say to individuals who say it doesn't really answer the questions about what this just transition should look like in the country? What's your response to that?
Well, I think for me, just transition, unfortunately, it emerges out of the international labor movement, and it was really essentially about ensuring that workers and communities historically involved in fossil fuel-based industries are taken care of and that they're integrated into a new path. It's now become a catch-all for the plan to restructure our energy system. So I think we need to really double down and think carefully about what we want a just transition to mean for South Africa, and to think about whether we believe that electricity itself is a public good, and whether the utility should be focusing on needs instead of creating opportunities for private generators and profits that will be largely shared for multinationals abroad.
The sense I'm getting from you is there are no simple answers, especially because you know the well-rehearsed argument. Eskom needs competition for it to work efficiently. That's essentially what the thrust of the discussions have been. But you're saying we should be careful about what that competition actually comes with.
Yes, and I think that we should be also cautious about buying into certain types of ideological fundamentalism, because when we're talking about that competition might also mean competition for high prices for gas in 5 to 10 years' time, and that will be passed on. The mechanisms of unbundling are allowing that to be passed on through your tariff. So you're saying you want more competition, but do you want more high electricity prices? So I think that the structure of our energy system is very important. We need more debate on that. We need to think about if we want an Eskom which is more focused on need. That's a different philosophy to one that is about primarily regulating competition between private actors. And there are different implications that follow from that. So we should be asking the question, if we're going to be paying for these new generation plants anyway, why can we not rebuild Eskom to be the public utility that we want, that's capable of executing complex tasks, that's transparent? If people are hoping that can come from the private sector, why is it that we cannot have the same personnel in the utility of the future that serves South Africans?
Well, I suppose some people might respond and say because we've been failed so often in the public sector. But that said, I mean, how would you then say the president should pitch whatever he has to say about Eskom later today, given the complexities we've just unpacked?
I think the president has been quite clear that he is pro the market reforms liberalization agenda. I think the least that we can hope for is that we get further clarity on what sorts of protections are going to be made possible for households. As the worst of the current crisis, the current shortage, we're about 5 to 6 gigawatts short in terms of the gap between supply and demand, but also that we will be hit of price increases this year between 20 and 40%. So it'll be highly disingenuous. I think listeners should be, and citizens should be looking out for comments here. What does the president have to say about price? What sort of protections are there? What is being done to increase free basic electricity? What's being done to ensure that free basic electricity is arriving at households who need it? We don't simply want to be hearing about all the different ways in which he's creating opportunities for private investors and hoping that materializes a solution.
Plenty to think about. Thanks for helping us connect the dots. Really do appreciate your time and insights this morning. Brian Kamanzi is an energy policy researcher at the Institute for Economic Justice. Once again, Brian, thanks very much indeed.